Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here and welcome to my guide to Jeuno, the First Walk, the latest Alliance raid in patch 7.1. To unlock this raid, speak to the Hoopigu Messenger near Tuliyolal's Aetheryte after completing the 7.0 MSQ. This drops item level 720 armor, as well as a minion, triple triad cards, an orchestrion, and a housing item. With the orchestrion tokens, you can even choose which song you want instead of needing to craft it into something else. Once per week, you'll also earn an Ordel coin, enabling you to buy tombstone upgrade materials. Given this is an Alliance raid, we've got quite a bit to cover, so use the timestamps to skip to specific bosses or mechanics. Also, thanks to my friend Whoops for providing some cinematic shots in this guide. Be sure to cheer us on when Ultimate comes out. The start of the raid simply has some basic trash mobs. There's nothing of note here, so we'll go right on to the first boss, Prish. For her basics, Prish uses Banishka 4 as a raid-wide AoE and Nullifying Dropkick as a shared tank buster. Handle these as you always do. She also has some spreads and a multi-hit AoE tower with Asern Fists, more standard stuff. The first unique mechanic is Knuckle Sandwich. Prish will target a spot on the arena with 3 distinct rings around it. For every time she charges her fist and goes, "Wait for it," she will expand the initial AoE by one of those rings. So 1 charge will only hit the smallest AoE, and 3 will hit the entire thing. Once the initial impact lands, step in to avoid the donut AoE shockwave that pulses out after. Next is Banish Storm. This drops 2 to 3 stabs with arrows pointing out of them. They will do gradually moving AoEs that pulse out from that initial location, so just don't be in line with any of the arrows. Don't be too close to the actual staves themselves, as the AoEs are large enough to clip you if you are too close. Shortly after this, Prish will use Crystalline Thorns. This puts spikes all around the arena that, if the player touches, will deal high damage, inflict a dot, and do a funny "ow, my butt" animation, stunning them briefly. With the spikes on the ground, Prish will charge Auroral Uppercut. You'll see 3 arcing arrows aiming away from Prish while she charges her fist. Much like Knuckle Sandwich, you'll be knocked back the exact distance of the arc that corresponds with the number of charges she does. The 1 charge will be the shortest of those knockback arcs, and the 3 the longest. Aim your knockback to avoid both the spikes on the ground, while not sending yourself off the side of the arena. From this point on, Banishka becomes empowered. It will now additionally summon tons of orbs that gradually explode for you to avoid. The large ones will blow up before priming the other orbs near its explosion to blow up shortly after. Just avoid the AoEs. Mind you, this will sometimes be combined with Crystalline Thorns or Knuckle Sandwich. The rest of the fight is just combined mechanics for what you've seen. Banish Storm plus Knuckle Sandwich, Thorns plus Banishka Orbs, and nothing too fancy. Finish her off and move on. The next portion of the dungeon is the Boyata Tree, which just has more basic trash mobs. Aquarius has the 100 Fist ability, which can be interrupted, and fires ground AoEs at the players if that happens. With that, we can move on to boss number 2, Fafnir. Fafnir has tons of body language style AoEs to get used to initially. First is Offensive Posture, which has 3 different variants based on animation. If Fafnir's tail is glowing, then you'll want to get in front of him in order to avoid Spike Flail. If he's in the air with his claws glowing, you'll want to get away from him for a point-blank AoE called Touchdown. And if he's in the air with his mouth glowing, it's a donut AoE Dragon Breath that will gradually cover the outside of the room. He'll eventually begin combining these mechanics, with the Donut Breath AoE either being combined with a point blank or the Spike Flail posture. Now, if it's the point blank, make sure you know where the fire donut began forming when the breath attack was going out, as you need to very quickly escape the range of the touchdown. Now, if the touchdown offensive posture hits a player, they will be concussed and stunned for a short time. I recommend keeping an eye out for this and quickly using Asuna on any players affected so they can move again. Spike Flail tends to follow the point blank landing, which, if you're stunned, you won't be able to get out of, so that can be especially bad. Fafnir's then going to use a few other basics. Baleful Breath is a repeat split damage line AoE, and Dark Matter Blast is raid-wide. There's also Sharp Spike, which is a tank buster that hits all 3 of the tanks with a little tank buster AoE. He even summons Darters, these Damselfly adds that will mostly just cast Pestilent Sphere on their target, dealing some minor damage. However, if they're left alive for a pretty long time, they'll begin spam casting Venom, a lethal conal AoE in the direction they're facing. This can be avoided technically, and it can also be interrupted or stunned, but it takes a very long time before they start using Venom. Odds are, if you just AoE them down, they'll be dead long before it's a concern. It's only going to be a problem if a lot of people are dead when Darters appear. After a few attacks, Fafnir will lift off and perform Hurricane Wing, dealing repeat damage to everyone before landing again, with the final hit doing more damage than the rest of them. Nothing fancy here, just survive. However, after Hurricane Wing, Fafnir will leap towards the wall and summon several twisters that move around the room. The three big ones slowly rotate around the outside, while the smaller ones move randomly around the middle. Being hit by one is not advised. Cascading AoEs will also begin occurring, either starting from the middle of the room and pulsing outward, or starting from the outside and gradually pulsing inward. Just have to avoid all the stuff. Fafnir will also begin spamming Horrid Roar, which will spawn red AoEs under players that you'll need to avoid. Being hit will inflict Hysteria, potentially causing you to run all around into other AoEs or even the wall. On the third Roar, 3 players will also get a Spread Damage AoE. Spread these out while avoiding all the stuff that's on the ground. AoEs, all the wind stuff, you know. It's definitely advised to step further out and dodge these pulses away from the middle of the room, as other players tend to congregate there regardless of which Hurricane Wing pattern it is. Fafnir can also jump to the wall and just do Winged Terror or Absolute Terror. Winged Terror hits the sides of the room, and Absolute Terror hits in a line through the middle. You'll usually be asked to kill a large number of darters during this combo, so just group them up and step out of the AoEs. Other than that, Fafnir will just keep repeating all of these attacks, so stay persistent and you should be fine. Just especially keep an eye out for the donut into point blank. That definitely gets people the most. The next bit of trash just has a bunch of pretty vanilla mobs again, though Despot near the end does have a few extra things. He can pull players in before doing a point blank into donut combo, has a tank buster and a ground AoE he'll aim at a player. Nothing special though, so let's go on to boss number 3. The third bosses are the 5 Archangels, also known as Divine Might. Each of these 5 Archangels has special mechanics depending on which phase you're in, and will chain them together in rapid succession. Phase 1 will have Archangels Galka, Taru, and Mithra each tether a handful of players while Human Elvan leave the arena. If you're tethered to one, that's the one you must attack to deal damage. This will be reinforced with an Alpha, Beta, and Gamma mark over their head, matching a debuff you're given of the same kind. Also, if any of the Archangels takes too much damage compared to the others, they will sacrifice their health to heal each other up, which means they'll be all around the same health for most of the fight. The fight will begin with a tank buster from Archangel Mithra, hitting all 3 tanks with an AoE Cloud Splitter attack. Handle this as you normally would. After this, the 3 begin spamming their respective mechanics. Archangel Galka will open with Mech Yoshisui, causing him to do a slew of big AoEs you'll need to avoid. Yukikaze forms 2 back-to-back stitch-shaped AoEs to avoid. Gecko will spawn a Gaze AoE Moon that you'll need to look away from, so dodge Yukikaze while looking away from the Gaze attack. Kasha will spawn a Ground AoE that after a short delay begins rapidly expanding, so dodge Yukikaze away from this ground effect as well. The Gecko Gaze attack will shortly after form a Fragmentation skill chain, doing a set of conal AoEs out from its location. Finally, where the Kasha AoE originated from will form a Light skill chain, simply a donut AoE you'll need to get to the center of. Just a lot of moving around here. Right after this, Taru will teleport away and begin casting Meteor. You just have to interrupt this or things are going to be bad. Mithra then jumps middle and begins performing Havoc Spiral, doing 3 rotating conal AoEs followed by a knockback from the center. Simply follow behind the AoEs and then get close to the middle for the knockback, or knockback resistant. Galka will then use Dragonfall, tethering a healer in each alliance with a split damage AoE. Just find the healer from your alliance and go stand on top of them, and then ensure the AoEs aren't on top of each other. Taru then teleports to a side of the room and begins casting Guillotine. This will do a multi-hit conal AoE that hits very hard and will hit everywhere but behind him, so get behind him. After a few more autos, this will mark the end of Phase 1. For Phase 2, the 3 initial Archangels will teleport away while the Hume and Elvan Archangels join the fray. Archangel Elvan will use Dominion Slash, doing massive raid-wide damage and summoning Dominion orbs around the room. Once these orbs sink into the ground, they form puddles that, if touched, will launch a player into the air. They'll also do a small explosion when they finally do expire, but just don't stand near them. Archangel Hume, on the other hand, will use Utsusemi, creating several clones of himself before using Mighty Strikes. This will cause any attacks taken by the player for the next several seconds to be a critical strike, dealing massive damage, probably killing non-tanks, and launching them into the wall. Each clone will tether to a player and chase after them, attempting to land one of these critical strikes. Simply run in circles around the arena while avoiding the Dominion orbs until the tether goes away. After the clones chase players for a few seconds, Hume will also use cross-reaving, simply laying down a cross-shaped AoE on the arena that you'll want to stand away from. It'll explode after a few seconds. After this, Elvan will use Holy to do raid-wide damage again. Once a few more autos happen, the two Archangels will teleport to the middle of the room, and Elvan will raise their shield to guard the Hume. Hume will begin channeling Mijin Gakure, an explosion that will wipe the raid. Quickly dispatch of the shield protecting him, then have anyone with an interrupt the Mijin Gakure cast. This will force Phase 3 to begin. Phase 3 will see the remaining Archangels rejoin the fight one at a time, this time without the debuffs forcing you to attack certain ones. Ensure a tank picks them all up as they rejoin. As each of them rejoins, they'll also perform an attack. Archangel Mithra actually joins first with a new attack, using her Rampage skill to do 4 back-to-back line AoEs, followed by a large circular AoE. Dodge them all? Taru joins and then uses Guillotine. Guess he didn't want to come up with anything new, just get behind him again. Galka rejoining sets up a quick combo between him, Hume, and Taru. He'll use Mekyo into the AoEs again, but Hume will use cross-reaving with the AoE going through the middle of the light skill chain donut. Just dodge out afterwards. Taru will begin casting Meteor from somewhere around the room during all this madness, so just be sure not to be too distracted and interrupt it. While most of the remaining fight is just combos of this sort with them all using their special attacks in kind of close proximity, they do have a couple of new attacks as well. I already mentioned Archangel Mithra, who will also continue using her Phase 1 attacks, including the Tank Buster, but Hume has a new attack that he'll use when he gets very low on health. He'll jump to the middle of the room and use Mighty Strikes before spamming critical Reaver AoEs on the entire raid. After using it a few times, he'll begin channeling an interruptible version of the ability, which will wipe the raid if it finishes casting. Either kill him or just interrupt it. Elvan also has a new attack, Arrogance Incarnate, a repeat split damage AoE, so just stack up and heal. This is usually followed by Mithra's Cloud Splitter, so let the tanks run away from the group here safely, instead of everyone running all over and the tanks trying to find a safe spot. Just keep avoiding everything and you should be fine. After this, you'll quickly find yourself at the final boss, the Shadow Lord. There's a lot of animation watching on the boss here, so make sure you keep your eyes glued to him. Shadow Lord starts with Giga Slash, doing 2 phantom slashing animations before hitting AoEs in those same spots. It'll be either left or right safe first and then the opposite, though the AoE sizes are not the same on each side, so pay attention to the animation. Next is Umbra Smash, which does 4 back-to-back line AoEs. After he performs each one, it will begin pulsing outward, so walk into where the initial AoEs hit in order to avoid everything else. After a Flames of Hatred, which is just a raid-wide AoE, Shadow Lord will use Implosion. He will hold 2 orbs in his hands, and after a short delay, one of these orbs will be embiggened. The side with the smaller orb just does a point-blank AoE, while the larger orb will expand to hit the entire arena. Just stand on the side of him that has the smaller orb just outside the smaller AoE. Once this is done, Shadow Lord will teleport middle and cast Chthonic Fury, doing raid-wide damage and changing the arena to 4 circles connected by narrow pathways, with death walls everywhere else. Occasionally, you'll see the message, Hatred spills forth from the Shadow Lord's dark sigils, after which circles will appear with spikes pointing out of them. Anything in front of a spike will be hit by an AoE. This takes the form of AoEs that hit the entirety of the circular sections, leaving only the paths in between. Donuts, where standing inside the circles are the only safe spots, and also a box AoE that will either hit all around the Shadow Lord or all around the outside of the safe spaces. Just get away from any Hatred spikes you see. He'll also use Dark Nebula during this phase, doing knockbacks from a line. Ride the knockback through the safe spots or even use knockback resist. After another implosion, Shadow Lord will use Echoes of Agony, just doing several back-to-back split damage AoEs on the party. Once he casts Chthonic Fury again, he'll do more raid-wide damage and return the arena to normal. Shadow Lord will then jump to the north side and cast Nightfall. This powers him up, equipping his War Armor and his Nightfall Sword, before doing a big Terra/raid-wide. From this point on, several of his attacks will be empowered, often featuring Nightfall in the name. Giga Slash now has a Nightfall variant, which will prepare 3 AoEs instead of 2. The first 2 AoEs will be the same left or right ones, but the third one will either have his front or his back be safe, so pay attention. He'll then use another new attack, Shadow Spawn. This will summon 2 Shadow Lord clones who will perform their own attacks in addition to Shadow Lord's own abilities. He'll use another Giga Slash Nightfall, and afterwards, a clone will use a normal Giga Slash, so just dodge all this stuff. Shadow Lord then uses Implosion, before a second clone casts Implosion. Again, just pay attention and be on the sides with the smaller orbs. Once this ends, he'll use Unbridled Rage, doing a line AoE Tank Buster on all 3 Alliance tanks. This is usually followed by a spread AoE, so just do this as you usually would. After another Echoes of Agony, he'll then use Binding Sigil, doing 3 back-to-back AoE sets that hit the ground. If you're hit by any of them, you'll be bound in place and given a delayed curse. When the curse expires, it will deal damage, inflict a vulnerability up debuff, and knock the player up. So just dodge the sigils. His next new attack is Damning Strikes. This will lock one player from each alliance in bubbles above the arena, while summoning 3 tiny split damage AoE towers. He'll volleyball the players into the tower locations. I just recommend Alliance A going southwest, Alliance B going north, and Alliance C going southeast. Not too unlike literally every other Alliance raid. But that is just the recommendation. They're not that hard hitting, they don't give a magic or physical vuln up, and as long as you just have a few players plus the person being knocked into it, you'll probably be fine. Players can also actually take multiple towers if they run between them. So players in the first tower can technically run to the third tower to help with it if necessary. Next is Chthonic Fury, which has some new combos. Dark Nebula will now do 4 back-to-back knockback AoEs, so look at the order they appear and ensure you follow the knockback safely. This will eventually knock you into a circle where the Shadow Lord is using Giga / Nightfall, so pay attention and dodge all 3 strikes. After that, there will be some Hatred Spikes and a spread AoEs before Chthonic Fury is cast again and the phase ends. The next Shadow Spawn will have both the Shadow Lord and his clones use Umbra Smash. Dodge the first set from the boss the same, but the 2 clones will just do a single line each, so hang near the center of the room where they intersect and dodge into the center after the AoEs go off. At this point you've seen every major mechanic, but the Shadow Lord does have one more trick up his sleeve. After you complete this entire cycle I've detailed to you, he'll begin casting Doom Arc. This deals heavy damage to the raid, gives them a bleed, and grants the Shadow Lord a damage up buff. For every cycle of this you let finish, he'll cast Doom Arc again, acting as a sort of soften rage. However, the odds of seeing more than a single arc is insanely low, given that each cycle of his skills is several minutes long. Just keep doing everything on repeat and you should be fine and never see past the first one. Heck, you might not even see the first one in a good group. And that's going to be a wrap for my guide to Jeuno, the First Walk. If you're a non-Final Fantasy XI player, I highly advise you watch my entire initial playthrough of this, as I do in full detail outline all of the references that appear. I'll probably do a standalone video that's a little bit more digestible on pretty much the same thing. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next one. Until then, take care.